Layla, choose one of these nannies.
No, I want Grace.
Oh, Layla, I'm here.
Go on, Layla. Choose one. That is why they are here. Nathan Holloway's voice was steady. 5 women stood in a careful line across the sitting room, each dressed sharply, each clutching a leather portfolio, each wearing the same practiced, pleasant expression, the kind that said, "I am exactly what you are looking for." They had all come for the same position. Nanny to Layla Holloway, the adopted daughter of one of the wealthiest men in Connecticut. It was the kind of job that changed a career. It came with a generous salary, a private suite on the second floor of a house most people would never set foot inside, and a letter of recommendation from Nathan Holloway that could open any door in the country. These 5 women had prepared for this moment. They had researched the family, pressed their clothes the night before, and rehearsed the kinds of warm, confident things one says to a 6-year-old who needs to trust you quickly. They were ready. Layla looked at them. She stood very still in the center of the room, her small hands loose at her sides, her eyes moving slowly from one woman to the next, the way a child looks at something when she already knows what she thinks, but is checking one more time to be sure. Then she shook her head. No. Nathan looked down at her. The 5 women kept smiling, the kind of smiling that does not stop right away because it has been practiced too many times to switch off quickly. "Go ahead, Layla," Nathan said again, softer this time. "You can talk to them first. Take your time." But Layla was no longer looking at the 5 women. She was looking past them, past the portfolios, past the pressed blazers, past the careful smiles, toward the far edge of the room, where a woman in a gray uniform stood quietly near the doorway, a folded dish towel in her hands, watching without being asked, present without being invited, still without being noticed. Grace Monroe, the housemaid. She had not been introduced. She was not part of the selection. She had simply come to collect the tea service from the sideboard and had not yet left, because something in her would not let her walk away, while Layla was standing in that room looking like a child being asked to choose between 5 strangers. Layla did not ask permission. She walked forward, then ran the last 3 steps, and pressed her face into Grace's side, wrapping both arms around her waist, and holding on the way children hold on when they have found the one thing they were looking for and are not letting go. "I choose her," Layla said, her voice quiet but completely certain. "I choose Miss Grace." The room went still. The 5 women stopped smiling. Nathan Holloway stood at the center of his sitting room, a man who had built companies, negotiated deals across 3 continents, and never once been caught off guard, and found, for the first time in a very long time, that he had absolutely nothing to say. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then Diane stepped forward. She was the one in the navy blazer, the one who had smiled the widest when Layla first walked in. The smile was still there, but it had changed shape. It was thinner now, more careful. "Layla," she said, her voice soft as warm water. "We understand. Big houses can feel lonely. And sometimes the people who work here, the ones who clean and cook and do laundry, they get very close to the children. It happens a lot." She paused just long enough. "But sometimes, sweetheart, that closeness isn't always what it looks like." A second woman nodded gently. "Staff in homes like this sometimes stay near the child because it helps them keep their position. It isn't their fault, but it isn't the same as real care." A third added, "We just want what's best for you. That's all any of us want." They spoke kindly, reasonably, the way adults speak when they want to sound like they're. Layla listened to all of it without moving, without interrupting, her hand still resting lightly against Grace's arm. Then she looked at Diane. "You got here today," she said quietly. "You don't know Miss Grace. You don't know me. But you're already saying she's pretending." She paused. "If you say bad things about someone you don't even know on the very first day, then maybe later you'll say bad things about me too. Or about my father. And maybe those things won't be true either." No one spoke. "I don't want a nanny who says things that aren't true," Layla said simply. "I already chose the one who stays." Nathan's voice came from behind her, quiet and firm. "Layla, upstairs. We'll finish this in the morning." Dinner that evening was quiet in the way that large houses get quiet, not peaceful, but held. Layla sat in her usual chair, feet swinging slightly above the floor, her plate barely touched. Grace had set the table the way she always did, everything in its right place, everything exactly so. But Layla only moved her food around slowly, as if the fork were something heavy. Nathan watched her from across the table. "You need to eat," he said. "I'm not very hungry." He set down his glass. "Is this about this afternoon?" Layla looked up at him with the steady, serious eyes she got sometimes, the ones that made her look much older than 6. "When people don't listen to me," she said quietly, "my stomach feels closed." Nathan had no answer for that. Later, Grace ran the bath water the way she always did, testing it with her wrist, adding a little cold, then a little more warm, until it was exactly right. Layla sat on the edge of the tub, watching the water rise. "Miss Grace," she said after a moment. "Yes, baby. Will you still be mine, even if Daddy says no again tomorrow?" Grace was quiet for a long time, long enough that Layla looked up. "I had a little girl once," Grace said finally, her voice low and careful. "She passed when she was very small. After that I just worked, kept moving, tried not to remember too much." Layla reached over and took her hand. "Then you can be mine," she said. "And I can be yours." Grace closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she smoothed Layla's hair and said nothing, because some things are too full for words. In the hallway, Nathan stood without moving, listening to a silence he did not have the heart to interrupt. He was still there long after Layla fell asleep. The next morning came sharp and bright, winter sun bouncing off the snow outside, until the whole house seemed lit from every direction at once. Grace braided Layla's hair before they went downstairs. She sat behind her on the small bedroom bench, dividing the sections slowly, carefully, the way she always did, like it mattered, because to her it always had. "Not too tight," Layla said. "If I don't braid it tight, it won't hold." "I don't care if it holds." "I do," Grace said softly. "When you walk out into the world, I want you to look like someone who is cared for." Layla was quiet for a moment, feeling the gentle pull of Grace's hands working through her hair. "Miss Grace," she said, "I'm going to choose you again today." Grace tied the ribbon at the end of the braid and did not answer right away. "I know, baby. Are you scared?" "A little." Layla nodded as though that was the right and honest answer. Then she said, "I'm not scared. Because you stayed. That's why I keep choosing you. Because you are already here." Grace turned her gently and looked at her face for a long moment. Then she stood, smoothed the front of her uniform, and said simply, "Let's go down." The 5 women were already arranged in the sitting room when they arrived. Same chairs, same folders, same careful expressions. Diane looked up when Layla entered and offered a warm, prepared smile. Layla walked past all of them. She crossed the room without hesitating, stopped beside Grace near the doorway, and took her hand. "I choose Miss Grace," she said clearly. "Same as yesterday." Diane exhaled sharply. One of the other women shook her head. Nathan looked at the room once, then said quietly, "Would you all give us a moment, please?" Nathan stood by the fireplace and looked at the 5 women for a long moment before he spoke. "I want to ask you something," he said. "If a child wakes up sick in the middle of the night, and it is not technically within your contracted hours, what do you do?" The women exchanged brief glances. Diane answered first, her voice smooth and certain. "She monitors the child's temperature, administers medication according to the parent's instructions, stays with her if necessary." She paused. "That is what she is paid to do." "Paid to do," Nathan repeated quietly. He nodded once, slowly, as if something had just finished settling inside him. "Thank you all for coming back," he said. "I'll be in touch." When the door closed behind them, the house felt different, stiller, like a room after a long noise finally stops. Nathan turned to Grace, who stood near the doorway as she always did, present, patient, waiting to be dismissed or needed, whichever came first. "Why did you stay with Layla the night she had the fever?" he asked. Grace looked at him steadily. "Because she kept waking up asking if someone was there," she said. "Not for medicine. Not for water. Just if someone was there. So I stayed and told her yes every time until she stopped asking." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Later he found Mrs. Aldridge in the corridor and asked for her honest opinion. The older woman chose her words carefully. the way she always did. She would never ask for this position, sir, Mrs. Aldridge said. Not because she doesn't care, but because she would walk away before she caused trouble for you. Nathan looked down the empty hallway. The person who mattered most to his daughter had no title, no authority, and was still standing in doorways. Nathan found Grace in the laundry room folding small things, Layla sweaters, a pair of mittens, a scarf with a loose thread she had already set aside to mend. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she noticed him. Mrs. Monroe, he said, I'd like to ask you something, and I need the truth, not the careful answer. Grace set down the sweater and waited. If I offered you the position, Layla's nanny, officially, with full responsibility, would you take it? Something moved across her face. Not quite surprise. More like a door opening onto a room she had never allowed herself to look at directly. Sir, she said carefully. Asterisk, there are people trained for that. People who know schedules and curricula and asterisk. You've been doing the job for 2 years, Nathan said quietly. I'm not asking about training. Grace looked down at her hands. People will talk. They'll say, I forgot my place. That I used the child to move up in this house. That I crossed a line I was never supposed to cross. I know, Nathan said. They probably will. People like me don't move into positions like this. Not without people thinking something is wrong. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I think something was wrong already. I just didn't see it until my daughter pointed it out. He paused. The person who matters most in her daily life had no authority, no recognition, and was expected to stand in doorways. That was the thing that was wrong. Grace's eyes filled, but she did not look away. Sometimes a title, Nathan said gently, is simply how the world recognizes what the heart already knows. He asked one last time, Will you stay? Grace looked across the hallway to where Layla sat on the sofa, watching them both with quiet, certain eyes. Yes, she said softly. I will stay. Layla was off the sofa before the words finished, arms wrapped around Grace's waist, holding on with everything she had. The news moved through the house the way news always moves through large houses, without anyone officially announcing it, and yet by evening everyone knew. Mrs. Aldridge said nothing, but noticed everything. 2 of the younger staff members exchanged a look across the kitchen that said more than words would have. Others simply adjusted. The way people in big households learn to adjust when the order of things shifts quietly and without explanation. Some were pleased. Some were uncertain. All of them watched. Nathan had lunch at his club 2 days later. White tablecloths, low voices, the particular kind of silence that expensive. What did you say? Nathan asked. I told her she was wrong, Layla said simply. I said Miss Grace is the most important person in my house. Nathan looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. He said nothing. But for the first time in several days, he smiled. The change came in small things, the way real change usually does. Grace started each morning with a narrow notebook open beside her coffee cup, Layla's weekly schedule written out in careful columns. School days, reading time, homework, bedtime. She cross-referenced it against the weather before deciding what coat Layla would need, checked it again before packing the school bag, and kept it close the way someone keeps something they have been trusted with and intend to honor. Nathan came downstairs one morning to find them already at the breakfast table together. Grace with her notebook, Layla with her oatmeal, moving through the morning the way people move through something they have done long enough that it has become its own kind of language. He sat down and said nothing, just watched. Every morning after that, Grace walked Layla to the car and said the same thing before the door closed. Be kind, pay attention, and remember, I'm here when you get back. And every morning Layla repeated it back like a small, private promise. You're here when I get back. After the 3rd week, Layla stopped asking who would pick her up. She already knew. The question had simply stopped being necessary. The gold star came on a Thursday. Layla ran into the kitchen, holding her reading chart above her head, and Grace looked up from the counter and smiled the way she smiled when she was genuinely, quietly proud. That's because you practiced, Grace said. And because you made me read even when I didn't want to. That too. Layla leaned against the counter, satisfied. Are you happy being my nanny? Yes, Grace said. I am. Good, Layla said. Because I'm very happy you're my nanny. From the doorway, Nathan watched them and said nothing at all. He was learning, slowly, that some moments only stay whole if you let them be. He had the drawing framed on a Tuesday, quietly, without telling anyone. It had been sitting on the corner of his desk for several days by then. Layla's 3 figures holding hands, drawn in crayon on a piece of paper torn from her sketchbook. The tall one in dark blue. The small one with 2 braids. The woman in gray standing between them, connected to both. He had looked at it every morning when he sat down and every evening when he stood to leave, and somewhere in that looking a decision had formed without him noticing. He called Grace to his office late that night, after the house had gone quiet. She came to the doorway the way she always had, standing just at the edge, present but not presuming. He held the frame out to her, without preamble. She took it carefully, looked at it for a long moment without speaking. I've been thinking about what Layla was trying to tell me, Nathan said. Not just with the choosing, with all of it. He paused. I was giving her everything I knew how to give. The house, the school, the opportunities. Everything that looked like enough. He looked at the drawing. But I was missing the one thing she was actually asking for. Someone who would still be there in the morning. Grace held the frame against her chest. Making it official matters, Nathan continued. Because in this world, titles are how things get protected. Without one, someone could decide one day that you're unnecessary, that you're temporary. His voice was quiet but steady. Eleanor disappeared from my life in a single afternoon. No warning, no goodbye. I was 10 years old and I stood at the top of the stairs and watched her walk out with her suitcase, and I never saw her again. Grace did not move. You're giving Layla something I never had, Nathan said. The right to keep the person she loves. Spring came slowly, the way it always does in Connecticut. First along the edges of the driveway, where the snow melts last, then across the wide lawn, then finally into the garden where Grace and Layla had been waiting for it with a flat of small yellow flowers and a bag of soil that Layla had insisted on carrying herself. They planted on a Saturday morning. Layla's gloves were too big and her knees were already dirty, and she kept placing the flowers slightly crooked, which Grace corrected each time with quiet patience, and which Layla accepted each time without argument. A small rhythm they had built without ever deciding to. Nathan stood on the terrace and watched them. His phone was in his pocket. There were emails. There were always emails. He did not go inside. At dinner that evening, Layla was still talking about the flowers. Which ones had gone in straight, which ones hadn't, which ones Grace said would bloom first. Then, midway through her sentence, she stopped, looked across the table at Grace, and seemed to be searching for a word she hadn't found before. You're not just my nanny, she said finally. You're my, she paused, trying it out. My person. That's what you are. She said it the way children say things when they have just named something true. Everybody needs a person. Someone who stays. Nathan closed his laptop. He did not open it again that evening. Later, after Layla was asleep, he stood in the hallway outside her room. The door was slightly open. The small lamp was on. Grace sat in the chair beside the bed, a book open in her lap, her presence as natural and unannounced as breathing. Nathan stood there for a long moment. Thank you, he said quietly, for staying. Grace looked up at him, then back at the sleeping child. There was